social studies. So we consider that part of social studies.
Yes, I understand
You as well. Whoop, whoop. I won't say anything else. Okay, so aloha and welcome to the University of Hawaii Uehiro Academy for Philosophy and Ethics in Education. Really glad that everybody's here. I hope that everybody got something to eat and something to drink. We have lots for everyone, so please make sure that you're comfortable. If anybody has to use the bathroom, they're down in the middle of the building on that end. So most of you have gotten an email from me. I'm Amber Strong Makayao. I'm the Director of Curriculum and Research here at the Uehiro Academy. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, the Uehiro Academy is the home of Philosophy for Children Hawaii. And P4C is an innovative approach to education that promotes the activity of philosophy and building intellectually safe communities of inquiry. And we're really honored tonight to have Dr. Kathy Swan, who is going to talk to us about the C3 framework. And I'm going to give you a little bit of introduction about her. And she just arrived yesterday, so she's settling in to Hawaii. She just had a triple cappuccino.
Shot.
Because what time is it for you?
It is 9:45. Oh, wow.
Okay, so we're just really thankful that she's here. She's an associate professor of curriculum and instruction and the director of next generation teacher preparation at the University of Kentucky. Dr. Swan has been a 4-time recipient of the National Technology Leadership Award in Social Studies Education, innovating with web-based interactive technology curricula, including the Historical Scene Investigation Project, the Digital Directors Guild, and Digital Docs in a Box. She is co-author of the book, And Action! Doing documentaries in the social studies classroom and the children's series, Thinking Like a Citizen. She is also the advisor for the Social Studies Assessment, Curriculum, and Instruction Collaborative at the Council of Chief State School Officers, and the co-editor of Contemporary Issues in Technology and Teacher Education, Social Studies. Dr. Swan also served as the project director and lead writer of the College, Career, and Civic Life Framework for Social Studies State Standards, and is now the co-director of the C3 Teachers. And for some of you, I hope everybody got a chance to look at the PDF of the C3 framework. We have a couple copies of it outside, and you can also order it through NCSS. So in her talk tonight, Dr. Swan is going to introduce us to the College, Career, and Civic Life Framework for Social Studies State Standards, also known as the C3. And then directly following her 25-minute presentation, we want to invite questions from the audience. We're hopeful that in addition to having Dr. Swan answer your burning questions about the C3 framework, that this portion of the evening is going to help stimulate discussion and collective inquiry about the future of social studies in our state. And who knows, it might even lead to informed action, which is the last part of the C3 framework. That was a C3 joke, so we'll all be laughing at the end. So with that said, we want to give a warm welcome to Dr. Swan. As she's talking tonight, everybody should be generating a question of something that you want to think about with this community in here of all these social studies and English language arts educators that we have gathered tonight. Because that's really what we want this to lead to, is to a discussion that starts here and to a broader discussion elsewhere. So I will step away.
Oh no. The technology's broken, and so now I can't speak. So, come on. Totally can happen. Come on, smartboard.
I just need to wake up.
I went to sleep. Am I staying on my screen?
Really?
Touch this.
Do you know what that?
I have no idea.
Oh, there we go.
There it is.
I've got to walk over here. Good job.
Great job, man. Thank you.
There it is. But you've got a really good title, so that's
Yeah.
that's
That's right.
excited
She
again.
must not be that good at technology. Thanks so much for coming out tonight at 10 o'clock. So I drank 3 shots of espresso because I'm not a night person anyway. You should never begin teaching. I know there's some pre-service teachers in the back. You should never begin teaching or speaking making disclaimers. But I'm going to make a disclaimer that I'm hoping that my sentences are coherent and I'm hoping that I don't start swearing in the middle of the presentation. So secondary is fine too. As Amber said, I'm going to talk tonight a little bit about the C3, and I'm hoping only to talk about 20 minutes, and then really we spend our time really talking about what this document C3 could mean for Hawaii. I'll start by just saying that I love TV. I obsessively watch shows. I'm the reason they created the term binge watch. There isn't a TV show that well, that's not true. HBO, I don't know how people live without HBO. I just think that that's an essential thing that people must own. And so a lot tonight will be kind of making references to the shows that I love, movies that I love, and we'll end with a little Hawaii reference that I hope goes over well. So anyway, so I call this talk Breaking Bad Social Studies. And the reason I begin that in that way is that that's where we began 5 years ago. We've had a real problem in social studies. We have a bad rap in social studies, that kids really rank it in research as the worst subject in school. Believe it or not. Not in these classes, not in Hawaii, but the other 49 states, that's what's happening. And so, we've had this problem where social studies teachers have focused more on the answers than really the questions, and that they've focused more on kind of the facts and tidbits of our dear subjects rather than really the big ideas. And so kids come out of social studies classes saying, this is really boring, it's irrelevant, I hate memorizing, we sure watch a lot of movies. And nowhere was this more codified than in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, with our man Ben Stein as the best teacher ever. Bueller. He was teaching about the Great Depression and monetary and fiscal policy in this scene, and obviously he made people go to sleep. And I just have to say, every time I look at him, I have one of my doctoral students, her last name is Mueller. So it's perfect, right? I get to say Mueller all the time. But anyway, that has nothing to do with this. So the problem is, in social studies is even if we have these kind of pockets of excellence, for the most part, not only do most educators at large, principals, administrators, policymakers don't think we're that important. On top of that, kids think we're boring as hell. I just used my first swear word. But we know, it'll get worse.
It was appropriate.
You're welcome. But we know social studies is about more. We know it is about knowing. It's about deliberation, though. It's supposed to be challenging. It's supposed to be controversial at its very heart. It's global in scope. It's about investigating, and that it's real. That social studies is life. It's when we wake up and read the newspaper. It's when we interact with various cultures. It's the way in which we see our parents. We can make ties there. It's the way in which we interact at school. It's the questions, the burning questions we ask every day. And it's the way in which we live as citizens in this country. So there's nothing more important right now in the wake of a new Congress and a president who set out a new agenda on Tuesday night for us to train the youngest people that we have, our youngest citizens, to prepare them for civic life. And so we knew about 5 years ago when we got together and started the C3 framework that we needed a reboot. We needed a restart. We needed to get rid of Ben Stein and bring in something better. And that we would capture the imagination of policymakers, that we would capture the heart of what social studies is, and that we might start, dare I say, a bit of a revolution in social studies. So, you're welcome. I love Indiana Jones. So we worked hard for about 5 years, and we brought together, at the time, I was leading a group of states out of the Council of Chief State School Officers in DC, called SASE, and Rosanna Okuda, hello, represented Hawaii in this consortium of 23 states that says, yes, please, in the wake of the Common Core, we need a document that speaks to the very heart of what social studies is, so that ELA, Common Core ELA, and those few pages where they talk about social studies doesn't become the de facto social studies standard. So these 23 states, along with these 15 professional organizations, the National Council for the Social Studies, the Council for Economic Education, National Geographic, you can read them in the first few pages of the C3, they join together. Chocolate, peanut butter, Reese's, people who grew up in the 80s, you know what I'm talking about. And we work together alongside people like me, scholars, and teachers, a group of 50 teachers, to try and develop a document that would speak to all of those different audiences and would not be a tone. And the most important part is that we would all get along. So for those of you who might know your social studies history, we have about a 100-year history of fighting. And so nobody, when we started this work, including CCSSO, thought it was either possible or that they wanted to shepherd it, because we always end up on the equivalent of Fox News. We always end up in some kind of stupid battle over something stupid, and then everything falls apart. And so the real accomplishment of the C3 is that we made it through what I call Thunderdome. 5 years of fighting behind closed doors, because there was some of that, deliberating, heated deliberation to come up with a document that really tried to capture this broad consortium of opinions about what social studies should be. So I like to talk about the C3 as an ethos. Certainly there's standards in there, you can drill down to specific indicators, but I think that's the problem with most standards documents, is that we spend too much time thinking about the little bits and not really thinking about the ethos. And so I guess it was a couple years ago, I went to speak to the American Federation of Teachers, AFT, in Washington, D.C., and it was on a Common Core workshop, and there was this woman who raised her hand. She was from New York, a teacher, and she said, you know, we spend so much time on these little standards trying to unpack them or parse them. What are we really trying to do? What are you really trying to get at in your classroom when you're really trying to teach literacy? And so when I think about the C3, I think the greatest sin of it would be to try and parse it down to the actual indicators. What I teach my students, my pre-service teachers, some of the in-service teachers that I work with, at the end of the day, the indicators, the standards don't matter. This matters, the ethos. The idea that students are wrestling with problems and that we are not a field or a collection of fields that provides answers, but we focus on the questions. We focus on curiosity, the inquisition, the inquiry itself. And that if teachers are trying to create these pockets of curiosity in their classroom, they're getting at the very heart of what we're trying to do in the C3. And that isn't to say that facts don't matter, because I do think they matter. I do think knowledge matters, knowledge of the field. But I also equally feel that when I walk into a classroom, I want to feel that kids are on the edge of their seats, that they feel part of the learning experience, that their questions matter, and that teachers are trying to broker that curiosity in some kind of meaningful way. And if we're not doing this, we're really not getting at the C3. So I like to begin there before I start drilling down into the document. So the C3 is built on 3 pillars. One is called an inquiry arc, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But we wanted a really powerful metaphor model to think about what it is kids do in social studies. The second was disciplinary literacy. The Common Core had just come out, not to mention that social studies teachers need to share in the responsibility for literacy education. So I became a teacher about 20-some years ago. And at the time, we didn't talk about social studies as literacy teachers. We kind of let the English teachers do that, the writing, and we just pretended, we stayed at a Holiday Inn the night before and we pretended to teach students how to write. It's a new ballgame now, and it should be a new ballgame. All of my students at University of Kentucky have to take a literacy class, literacy education. They need to teach what it is to do an argument, what it means to write an explanation, how to read documents apart from the way in which we ask the big questions in social studies. So that there's this marriage between what it is we do in social studies and what it is we're trying to do in terms of the larger literacy goals of the school. So that's the second pillar. The third is the piece de la resistance, which is the civic life part. That's the action piece and the way in which we prepare students intentionally for civic life. So I saw a couple of, there might have been a poster back here that had Dewey on it. Are you guys back in the back reading Dewey a little bit, John Dewey?
Oh yeah.
Right, you have to read that, right? My students love every page. You guys, yes? Not at all, they hate it. Force it down like good vitamins. But anyway, John Dewey began 100 years ago talking about the meaning, the purpose of schools, not just for social studies, but all of schools were for citizenship education. Now, social studies plays a huge role, and in the course of the last 5 years, where we see this complete transformation of kind of policy, educational policy, we hear a lot about college and career readiness, very little about civic life. And so we threw down on civic life in this document and really tried to amplify the ways in which students could practice civic engagement. So we'll talk about that as we talk about the inquiry art. All right, so the inquiry art, one of my friends, he's one of my friends, but he was also a co-writer of the C3. His name's S.G. Brand. He said at the beginning of this process about 5 years ago, he said, I give this thing about a 30% chance of actually working. And then he also said, wouldn't it be great if we could fit a standards document on a bookmark? So anybody who has to learn the Common Core, it's like, I love the Common Core, so don't get me wrong, but no one's going to have that tattooed on at least one body. You're going to have several bodies to have that Common Core document tattooed. It's just long and cumbersome, and most standards documents aren't. They don't make choices about what goes in. It's too hard because they're political documents. We wanted a document that really spoke in 4 powerful ways. What is social studies about? And that it really be kind of metaphorical. So we did. We based the backbone of the document as around this inquiry arc. Dimension 1, just like I said, is about questions, developing questions and planning inquiries, so that teachers and students are working together to think about the big questions. We call them compelling questions. Certainly some essential questions are compelling, but that questions that are worth asking, that are interesting to kids, and that are interesting to our disciplines. So developing questions are important, and I think it's the only standards document in the history of standards document that actually takes questions seriously. So it's frontier work. Dimension 2 is what looks most similar to traditional social studies documents, but we think this is an interesting take on it. Dimension 2 is where the disciplines reside. Civics, economics, geography, and history, you have to do them in alphabetical order or people fight. And so we lay them alongside one another. We worked with 3 historians, 3 economists, 3 political scientists / civics people, and 3 historians to try and craft what are the tools and concepts of a discipline that students would need to know and be able to do at every grade band. We did not include what we call curricular content, what I like to call molecular content in the document. No Abraham Lincoln, no Lincoln, Nebraska, nobody buried in Grant's tomb. We just didn't get that molecular. Why? It wasn't possible. But it doesn't mean that I don't think it's important. I actually think it's very important that kids know things. I want my son, my 8-year-old, to know who Abraham Lincoln is. I want him to know that World War I came before World War II. I want him to know all sorts of things about the world. That we think needs to be done at a state or local level, not at a national level. And so we chose deliberately not to include that kind of what we call curricular content, I call molecular content, into the document. So it just sits at a different perch. Dimension 3 is probably most closely tied to the Common Core. It's where students read sources and use those sources in order to build an argument. So if you start with a question, you start learning a little bit about it. In Dimension 2, you're reading sources, you're starting to build an answer. Dimension 3 is where there's really guidance on how you might evaluate those sources and use them in an argument or an explanation. And Dimension 4 is where the magic happens. That's where students communicate their conclusions in a variety of ways, in multimodal means, in debate, oral arguments, in terms of presentations. And then where it gets really awesome is in this taking informed action piece, where students use their inquiries as a foundation for moving outside of the classroom into the community, however you define that, whether that be the school community, the community, or hopefully the global community as well. We called it taking informed action for a reason. We wanted it not to be service projects. We wanted it, could be, but that it would be preceded, that the action would be preceded by being informed. And that we believe that social studies really has the corner on that market. And so we had this idea that we would love for social studies teachers to really own those kind of service learning projects, those kind of community projects, but that they would situate it within these inquiries that they're doing, that they would be an extension of the inquiries they're doing in social studies. So that's the C3 in a nutshell. What I thought I'd do tonight, I know there's kind of a mixed group here tonight. We've got, who in here is a pre-service teacher, doing their student teaching right now? Right. How many of you are teachers? Rank and file. All right, great. How many of you are administrators? Are any administrators? Boo. No, I'm just kidding.
We're not in the school.
How many professors? I know there's a history professor, right? So we've got some professors in here, my people. Great. And who else is in here? Anybody not fall into those categories? People wandering off the street. Free food.
Great community members as well.
Community members,
yes,
right. So, okay, cool. All right, so what I thought I'd do tonight, if I were talking to teachers, I might do something, just teachers, I might do something differently, but I felt like it was really important to think about the national stage, you know, what's happening with the C3 nationally in order to bring it home to Hawaii and what Hawaii might do with the C3, since there were all of these audiences. So I'll talk about that. So the C3, we see it having multiple purposes. One of which is to create new standards. So obviously we wrote it to be a standards document, but we believe that there's lots of pedagogical undertones. In fact, we almost didn't call it an inquiry arc. We almost called it an instructional arc, because these are the things that you're learning in your methods class, right? These are the best practices, what I call best practices that happen in the social studies. So we see there's these direct ties from not only what students should know and be able to do, but how teachers should teach these students to know and be able to do. So we think that the document has a lot of potential in terms of underscoring good pedagogy, thinking about how professional learning might be framed, to think about the way in which curriculum instruction could be delivered, assessment, the holy grail, I'll talk about in a little bit, and then just fundamentally to explain to policymakers why is social studies important. I'm going to talk tonight a bit, about 5 more minutes if I go really fast, about my dream. So my dream is really around my own experience as a teacher and what I see happening to teachers all the time, which is mixed messages. So most social studies, and probably most math, science, English language arts, do not see symmetry between what I call the three domains of a classroom or of education, where there's a standards document that speaks directly to curriculum instruction, which speaks directly to assessment. Typically, these lines are broken. I'll give you an example in Kentucky. Our Kentucky standards have nothing to do with what happens in real classrooms, and it looks nothing like what's happening with assessment. So our current standards are based on the 10 thematic strands of the National Council of Social Studies. It's way, way up here at a high perch, kind of almost ethereal in nature. What happens in assessment is we have a few high-stakes exams that are very, very extremely multiple choice molecular, right? And then teachers are stuck in between these worlds because not only do they have these standards documents that don't really speak to what their history curriculum looks like, but then they've got assessments that they're held accountable to that look nothing like what their principals, administrators, and me are telling them to do as teachers. So they get these really kind of odd messages, and students don't know what to do, right? They don't know what they're supposed to know and be able to do. So my big dream for C3 is that states would think about social studies and aligning and then creating some symmetry and coherence between the standards that are implemented, the curriculum and instruction models that are supported, and the assessments that are given. And that thread, that coherence would be around inquiry, right? That would be the rug that ties the room together. What? No one? Big Lebowski? Are you kidding me? That's hilarious. Nobody? Big Lebowski?
Yes.
No one?
Yes.
I thought that was really good for 10-10. Okay. All right. It's not going to get much better than that. All right. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about what's happening around the country since the C3 was published about a year and some change ago. So first of all, states are starting to pick up on standards. So Connecticut and Kentucky, my home state of Kentucky, have both created new standards documents that are fundamentally built off of the C3. And I'll show you an example. I'll show you Connecticut's in a second. Let's see, Arkansas, Missouri, and that's it. Arkansas and Missouri and Michigan are all beginning that process this year of starting new standards documents using the C3. New York, North Carolina, Maryland, and Illinois is also in that group. And Kansas, what they did is they took their current content standards and they said C3 too. They just had their boards approve both documents. Because, as we know, standards processes are all sorts of political, and so states need to do what they can do when they can do it. But I think it's important to know that some states are picking up on this. Now, C3 is different than Common Core in a lot of different ways. One of which is there's no race to the top, and there's no political will to make this happen in states. It is at the very heart a social studies process, meaning that it takes change agents within a state to make this happen. Because no policymaker is knocking on anybody's door saying, you know what we really need? Our new social studies standards. You need it from the ground up. But we're social studies, and we want it like that, right? We're not living in an age, even if we wanted to, especially with the Common Core backlash right now, where we could have kind of a federal mandate or a national push for new standards. Instead, it's got to come up from teachers, it's got to come up from agents of change within a community to say we want a different kind of social studies. And we're starting to see that percolate, and percolate well. So Connecticut just passed their new standards, and you won't be able to see this especially if you're sitting over there, but I think it's important to note that they hardwired all 4 dimensions into every single grade level. It's their architecture for how they put their standards together. Phase 2 is they're working on curricular units for teachers based on these standards. Phase 3 they're thinking about assessment. They don't have high stakes or large scale assessment right now, so that's not part of their vernacular in Connecticut. But it's important to know that states are doing this and implementing it and passing it through legislatures. Many states are going after curriculum and instruction, developing new modules based on the inquiry arc, trying to bring in teachers to develop new modules on the inquiry arc. I'm involved in a very big project in New York. It's a $3.2 million, well, Dr. Evil, $3.2 million social studies project, which is pretty much unheard of in social studies. You never use those numbers in social studies. To develop what's called a toolkit for teachers in New York. That toolkit is going to be made up of what we're calling 84 inquiries, meaning 84 investigations that are tied to their standards K through 12. So it is wonderful. The great thing about these 84 inquiries, and the only reason that I'm doing it, is that we're publishing them open source, meaning that every state in the union, everybody in the world will have access to these come summer. And you can just splice and dice and do what you need. So it's very much a common good. We're basing this off a model that my colleague, S.G. Grant and John Lee, have developed called the Inquiry Design Model that focuses on questions, tasks, and sources, and which we use what we call a blueprint to anchor curriculum development. So no prescriptive, are you guys doing lesson plans for your horrible methods professor right now? None of that. It's like batting practice. I tell my students it's like batting practice. Everybody does lesson plans when they start out. What we're trying to do is kind of think about what do real teachers, your fake teachers right now, what do real teachers do? Real teachers, and I taught for 10 years. What we start to do over a period of time is you start to block things out, right? You're not micromanaging every day. So we developed a blocking plan, or what we call a blueprint, to kind of hit on the big post holes of an inquiry, to really focus on the big picture. And then, if you want to, you can drill down on a particular task. So I say that because that's something that's up and coming in the next 6 months. All right, I need to start finishing. What's trending in assessment? So I'm working with this consortium of states. Rosanna's part of this consortium in which we're trying to go after the Holy Grail. So for those of you who follow assessment news, national assessment news, there's a big debate that's going on right now. Even Arnie Duncan weighed in last week that he said, over my dead body, are you getting rid of these high stakes tests? Which is kind of unbelievable for Democrats, that they're like digging in on high stakes tests. I'm like, really? What is happening? But anyway, they are. We believe that kids should be tested every day and every year of their life. So there's that camp, but there's also this other big camp, really led by parents and CCSSO, to reduce the amount of testing and to think about other ways to assess students. And I'm so much into that. I'm all about the glass half full for social studies, is we should get into this game. We should get into the, what if we didn't have the typical high stakes assessment? And so what we're proposing in our little consortium, SASE, and hope to have something out by the summer, is a piloting challenge to our states across the country, where that maybe instead of going the bubble test route, that maybe they might go with an inquiry at the end of the year in order for students to demonstrate their understanding, and that it would have high base validity, meaning it might end in a letter to the editor, right? It might take a controversial issue, gender wage gap, ACA, Affordable Care Act, pick one of the controversial issues, ultimately have students ask a question, answer the question through an argument, write a letter to the editor, using all 4 of the disciplines in their answer or in their letter. So we're working on this. This is hopefully going to be hot off the presses this summer, and I'm very excited about that. So I'll end. I didn't know how to end, so I'll just be honest. So I have 5 different slides because I couldn't choose. So this is my big question, which is, I would like to see Hawaii be up to this challenge. We haven't had a state to commit to these three. Sometimes states go here and they get tired, or somebody leaves the position, the internal champion, and the rest of it gets lost. Sometimes people just don't see the big picture. But when I started talking about this, I heard grumbling in a good way in the audience. Teachers want this kind of alignment. And I would love to see this happen in Hawaii. I would love for you to take on the trifecta challenge and make social studies kind of a coherent subject that's taught. So here are my funny slides to end. So here's Magnum, PI. Is Hawaii up for the C3 challenge? Come on, he's all about investigations. And then my husband did this one for me, so forgive me if you're offended. What? What? Higgins tells me you need someone to make an inquiry. Let me get my shirt, or not. And then my favorite show, what Game of Thrones? I keep trying to get my students to call me Khaleesi, but they won't. They're kind of look at me weird. But Game of Thrones starts in April. So I'll end there. I think I went over time. I'm sorry, Amber.
No.
That's what 3 shots of espresso will do. But I'll end there with just a challenge. Where could Hawaii go with the C3, and does that resonate with kind of the ethos of what you're trying to do in social studies?
Cool. Well, I think what we wanted to do is we wanted to open up with questions. And since we're in the home of P4C, we're going to use a community ball. And we'll use the one that my social studies students made. So those of you who are unfamiliar with P4C is we make a community ball at the beginning of the semester. And it's a tool for mediating turn-taking, for actually practicing deliberative democracy in the classroom. And the rules of the community ball are only the person with the community ball speaks, the person with the community ball you always have the right to pass, but the person with the community ball chooses who goes next. And that's what I just want to change up a little bit. Instead of us having just back and forth with Kathy, I'd like people to start with questions. If you think it's something that just Kathy can answer, pass it back to her. But if people want to build on it and add to what people have said before them, we'd like that as well. And that you, the audience, is picking who gets to speak next. So I know that we have questions in the audience. Who is going to go first? Who's got a question that they want to either ask to Kathy or bring out? Right, Cahal Glasgow.
So I totally agree with all of those things. And I am not a proponent of knowing all of the information because we have Google, you know, like facts and things. But if there is going to be content standards, what I'm finding is when you do an inquiry, it takes a while, and we only have a certain amount of time with the kids. So we're in high school, and I mean we teach high school, and you know, an inquiry could take 2 to 3 weeks on one subject or one topic. So how is it that we are to get in, you know, Renaissance, scientific revolution, you know, industrial revolution, all those things in? But yet still get the deeper thinking of the inquiry. So that's my challenge, is like getting all that stuff in.
Do you want to pass the ball back, or do you want to pass it to someone else?
I can't remember who said it, but in a book of reading science, social studies, education, someone used the analogy of an airplane. And so a lot of the course you're flying at high altitude over a lot of material. Occasionally you drop lower down and you get a kind of view of the landscape much closer. And then sometimes you land and you get out of the plane, you walk around, and you play with stuff. And so I think the inquiry, the document inquiry especially, is that when you land the plane, you get out. So you're teaching the skill that's cross-applicable. So that's one way of thinking about it is, yeah, we have to cover this stuff. We're doing American history, you know, over a couple hundred years. So you're going to have to get there, but
Yeah.
you
Well,
can
we
land.
teach world history, so it's
Well,
like
in world history, yeah.
it's fun.
Yeah, I teach world history.
Yeah.
So do you think it's about like how teachers design the inquiry so that like your compelling question or your philosophical question that's framing your inquiry has the ability for people to meet multiple standards at once? So you really have to have a grasp of like what's all of those things in the second dimension, that your question is going to have them hit on multiple things so you're not doing something linear. Because I have a similar question, and when we went to NCSS this November, you were sharing they've made samples of C3 lessons with compelling questions, but I think that they said they were only 3-day lesson samples, and so I was curious again, if, like, how can you do an inquiry in 3 days? And I'm interested in, like, what you think about how you guys have framed it.
Yeah, so I would say two things. One is I completely agree with you that, you know, essentially, well, what I would say is that, and I tell my method students this, is inquiry can't necessarily happen every day because there has to be, you know, if you're going to cover more than one topic, you know, you're going to have to speed up. And so the way in which we've situated the New York inquiries is that we've used the term inquiry specifically, not unit, because inquiries can sit within a larger unit, meaning that teachers still lecture. Teachers still, I love to lecture, I just lectured, it was awesome, right? I mean, that's still a part of our repertoire. I mean, I think that a lot of teachers worry from like cold dead hands, you're gonna take the lecture from me and the PowerPoint. And I say, I'm not going to. I mean, we still need that. But that once a month, more master kind of senior teachers, more than once a month, you're dipping down. And you're having what I call a laser show. Not every day's a laser show, but like if you can aim for one laser show a month, I think that you're doing great as a teacher. So that's kind of how I explain it to my teachers. The other thing is that we're playing with inquiries that don't last 3 weeks. So that the book that you're referring to, we worked with 15 curricular partners last year and produced a book called Teaching the C3 Framework. And there are 15 lessons that all last between 1 and 3 days and cover the entirety of the inquiry arc, right? The New York inquiries go from anywhere from 3 to probably